short one.
Afghanistan is not a country in the conventional sense. It is 650,000 square kilometers of vertical terrain. The Hindu Kush, literally translated as the slayer of Hindus, slices through this land like a jagged 7-kilometer high wall. Every valley here is a hermetically sealed world. For centuries, the reach of a central capital hasn't been felt in these mountains. It is a place where borders are just lines on a map, but geography is the only law. Why has no empire managed to hold this ground for over 2,000 years? The answer isn't found in mysticism or ancient curses. The answer is clinical. It's logistics. 2.3 trillion US dollars, 8 billion Soviet rubles a year, and the lives of tens of thousands of British soldiers, all vanished into the same black hole. Today, we perform a full deconstruction of this geopolitical dead end. You will learn how the rifled barrel of a single tribal musket shattered the pride of the British Empire. We will examine how the Mongol destruction of ancient wells altered the region's climate for 800 years. And finally, we will uncover why China is now buying what no one could ever take by force. This is a rational dissection of history. No fluff, no myths. This is The Weave. Let's dive in. 330 BC. Alexander the Great dismantled the Persian Empire in just 3 major battles. His army was a masterpiece of military engineering. But at the borders of Bactria, the gears of that machine finally ground to a halt. This is where he met Spedamenes, the man who rewrote the rules of war. Alexander was a master of the phalanx, a wall of 6-meter pikes designed for the flat plains. But Spedamenes refused to fight on Alexander's terms. He introduced asymmetrical warfare 2,000 years before the term existed. Using mobile light cavalry, he struck supply lines, vanished into the desert, and left the heavy Greek infantry gasping for air in narrow canyons where they couldn't even turn around. To hold the ground, Alexander had to bleed his army dry. He left 17,000 soldiers behind just for garrison duty. 1/3 of his force became nothing more than watchmen. The campaign peaked at the Sogdian Rock, a fortress deemed impregnable. Alexander's 300 elite climbers scaled a vertical cliff using tent pegs and ropes. 30 fell to their deaths, but the sight of Greeks above them forced a surrender. Alexander's marriage to Roxana wasn't a romance. It was a political surrender. He realized he couldn't conquer these tribes. He could only become their relative. Afghanistan was the first place where the dream of a universal empire began to crack. Most people think the Mongols only burned cities. No, they did something far more devastating. They destroyed the engineering foundation of life itself. Before 1221, Afghanistan was a garden. The secret? The Kharez system. These are complex underground aqueducts, stretching for miles to keep water cold and protected from evaporation. It was a system built over millennia. But when Genghis Khan's favorite grandson, Mutu Khan, died at the siege of Bamiyan, the Khan's revenge was clinical. He didn't just order the death of the people, he ordered the death of the land. The Mongols systematically filled the Kharez ventilation shafts with rocks and corpses. A Kharez is a living organ. Without maintenance, it collapses in 2 years. In a single decade, Genghis Khan destroyed the irrigation of an entire region. Agriculture vanished. Cities like Balkh, the mother of cities, became ghost towns. 90% of the urban population disappeared. Those who survived fled to the high mountains, creating the isolation of tribes we still see today. Afghanistan ceased to be a unified state and became a quilt of hostile valleys. The 19th century, the British Empire, the master of the seas and industrial technology. In 1839, they marched into Kabul, convinced that savages with sticks would flee at the sight of redcoats. They were wrong. They fundamentally misunderstood ballistics. The legendary thin red line, a formation designed for the flat plains of Europe, became a death sentence in the jagged crags of the Hindu Kush. The British carried the brown Bess, a smoothbore musket effective at barely 150 yards. Beyond that distance, the lead ball became unpredictable, tumbling through the air like a leaf in the wind. Meanwhile, Afghan craftsmen were handmaking the Jazail. These weren't primitive toys. They were long, heavy, and most importantly, rifled. The spiral grooves inside the barrel stabilized the bullet, allowing it to cut through the thin mountain air with surgical precision. While a British soldier had to stand tall to deliver a volley, presenting a perfect target, a Pashtun marksman could fire comfortably from the shadows of a boulder. They had a range of 500 yards. It was a shooting gallery. A Pashtun marksman from a ridge could pick off a British officer while remaining completely untouchable. The retreat from Kabul in 1842 was a massacre. In the frozen bottleneck of the Kord-Kabul Pass, the logistics of an empire simply collapsed under the weight of the terrain. Out of 16,500 people, only one man, Dr. William Bryden, reached Jalalabad alive. Failing to win by force, London applied geographic poison. In 1893, Sir Mortimer de Rohan drew a 2,640-kilometer border with a ruler. Sitting in a comfortable office in Simla, he prioritized the security of the British Raj over the thousand-year-old reality of the region. The Durand Line sliced the Pashtun people in half, separating families and grazing lands. Britain created a perpetual conflict that no Kabul government has ever recognized. It is a geopolitical time bomb that is still ticking today. 1979. The Soviet Union made the most noble yet irrational attempt. They tried to build a civilization, factories, schools, and the Salang Tunnel, a 3,300-meter engineering marvel through the heart of the mountains. But Moscow fell into the infrastructure trap. The Salang Tunnel became a bottleneck. A single insurgent with a rocket launcher could hit one fuel truck inside the tunnel and paralyze the entire 41st Army for weeks. The more roads the Soviets built, the easier it became for the Mujahideen to move. The CIA's Operation Cyclone pumped $700 million a year into the conflict. When the Stinger missiles arrived in 1986, Soviet aviation lost the sky. This war cost the USSR 800,000 rubles per hour. The Soviet economy didn't break in the shops of Moscow. It broke in the passes of the Hindu Kush. Ideology shattered against the Pashtun Wali Code. In 1989, the last Soviet APC crossed the bridge, leaving a ready-made infrastructure for the next empire's war. The Americans arrived in 2001 with a checkbook for $2.3 trillion. That is more than the Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of all of Europe. But for 20 years, they didn't build a state. They built a simulation. The U.S. Special Inspector of Cigar wrote reports for years. On paper, the Afghan army had 300,000 men. In reality, more than half were ghost soldiers, names on a list used by commanders to steal salaries. To move fuel to their bases, the U.S. hired local security firms. Those firms paid taxes to the Taliban for safe passage. Essentially, the Pentagon was financing its own enemy to keep the war going. In August 2021, an army that cost $88 billion dissolved in 11 days. The U.S. left, leaving Bagram Air Base with the air conditioning still running. It was the ultimate lend-lease for the Taliban. 22,000 Humvees, 600 APCs, and 160 aircraft. The most modern army in the region was armed by the American taxpayer. Now Beijing is looking at the Hindu Kush, but China has learned the lessons of history. They don't want your soul, your faith, or your democracy. They want the periodic table. Mes Aynak, the world's second largest copper deposit. China has already locked in a $3 billion contract. Lithium, Afghanistan's reserves are estimated at $1 trillion. In the age of electric vehicles, this land could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium. China's strategy is pure extraction. They are building a road through the narrow Wakhan corridor to link Kabul directly to China. Recognition for the Taliban in exchange for the safety of the mines. But the question remains, can the soft power of the yuan protect investments where phalanxes, tanks, and drones all failed? The Afghan knot remains untied, but now it says, Made in China.